given unto me in heaven and in earth. Then, verse 19, go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even until the end of the earth, end of the world. And so we look here at this passage of what is called the Great Commission. The church is brought into the purpose of the church, the commission of the church, why the church exists. Without purpose, when someone would get saved, they would just just go to heaven. But we don't go to heaven immediately when we're saved. We're left here on earth, and so we're left with a purpose. And that's an interesting aspect. And so the church, purpose of the church. Now, in modern times, we use two words to describe churches in a modern sense. One, we call it a gathering church. Now, this is very popular in our culture, in the American culture. This is very much what people anticipate and expect churches to be. In other words, it's an event that people go to. Church is an event that people go to. It is so predominant. In fact, it is beyond the majority. It is pretty much all church software, all church information, all church helps and materials are all built on gathering church. If you're involved in church marketing, you're a gathering church. Now, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. I think all churches need to do that in some measure, but a gathering church is just interested in having their location, gathering people to that location, and ministering to the people who come. The second type of church that occasionally you hear in a modern sense, you hear people talking about, but that is a sending church. In other words, we're more interested in sending people out to do kingdom work than to gather at an event. And maybe you don't like me using the word event for a church service, but you kind of get the idea. Instead of it being gathering people in, our focus is sending people out. Now, this is supported predominantly in the New Testament church. We're called apostolic, and the reason why we're called apostolic is we want to do and function as, be as close to the first century church as possible. In other words, we look at what Jesus taught his disciples and the pattern that he taught his disciples, and we want to look at those things and say, all right, this is how Jesus set up his church. And so if he taught his disciples that 2,000 years ago, then we need to mimic what he taught, not only in doctrine, but in method. We need to mimic those things in our generation, in our time on the face of this earth. And so the word apostolic literally doesn't come, it's a Greek word that doesn't find its roots in Christianity. Apostolic was a position that, if you think about a governorship, he would send an emissary, what we would call an emissary, to represent him, or an ambassador to represent him. Apostolic literally means sent, the sent ones. The sent ones. So the concept of the first century church was not to gather, but to send. And so the structure, not only of how they thought about church and how they thought about how to do church, it was more of an idea of we've got to send out. You know, being Jews, they understood what happened at the Tower of Babel. When people decided not to disperse, That was not a good concept. No, we're not going to disperse. We're going to gather here at Babel, which is Baghdad in modern day sense. That's where it was located, is Baghdad. And we're going to gather here and build ourselves a tower. And so the concept of humanity is to gather and then to try to escape or justify why we gather. As the gathering is the end all. The gathering is not the end all. He called us to go. The commission is to go. If you begin to study the book of Acts and you see how they were structured, look at when they brought, was it Paul and Barnabas in, and they were praying. So the elders, the job and the role of the elders was to pray, and at least in this aspect, was to pray not only to what seemed good to them, but also to what seemed good to the Holy Ghost. And from that place of what seemed good to them and what seemed good to the Holy Ghost, they sent forth Paul and Barnabas into the mission field. So the church structure was about, we've got a governing board to send forth people into the field. Train, send. Train, send. Train, and send. And so you begin to see this action of the Great Commission and how it plays out, or how it did play out in the book of Acts. The book of Acts is the history book of the New Testament. It's the only history book in the New Testament. And so it is that there to give us exactly what the early church believed, how they functioned, the methods they used, how they were organized. All of those things came together. But let's look, live from 185 to 225